Hello, my name is Michelle Farrell, and I'm happy to welcome you to our webinar on hotels in small island developing nations. So this webinar, like most of our webinars, will be recorded, and this will be available on the official EDGE YouTube video channel. Now today, our agenda is quite clear. We're going to focus on issues in small island developing states, specifically faced by hotels. So to open up our discussion, we'll have Nicola talk about challenges faced by the hospitality sector, specifically in the Caribbean. And then we're also going to look at how architects today are already helping clients adapt. And Arlen from Gensler is going to bring us through this. Next, we're going to look at solutions, financing solutions. How can IFC support investment in hotels? And what parts of sustainability do we provide that investment for? And then finally, I will go into some of our innovative climate tools that IFC already has developed today, most for the common good, that you can access and start to use on your projects already. So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about what are the SIDS, or the Small Island Developing States. Well, these states, the SIDS, are located in 3 geographical regions: the Caribbean, the Pacific, the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and in the South China Sea. Now, the building sector itself is highly vulnerable to physical risks. Now, for example, we saw in Turkey economic losses in 2023 of 84 billion after the earthquake. And Pakistan was about 15 billion for reconstructing their infrastructure in a more resilient way. And we know these facts already. The National Institute of Building Scientists has already reported that $1 invested in a resilient building can save $4 in recovery costs. And this makes sense, right? Because the impacts of climate change on the SID states are increasing every day. So what does that mean, an increase in these? We're talking about increased frequency and intensity of hurricanes, cyclones, and tropical storms. So for example, in 2024, we saw the first 5 category hurricane appear as early as June in the Atlantic, and this has to do with the warming temperatures. We also see floods and droughts are disrupting water supplies and agricultural production. The rising sea temperatures are fueling more powerful storms and damaging the marine ecosystem like the coral reefs. We even have a case where 5 of the Solomon Islands have already disappeared, and more of those islands are inhabited and at risk. Now, these are not just the only things that we can see. Health impacts, whether it's heat waves, extreme temperature, they can lead to the spread of diseases such as dengue fever, malaria, and Zika. And the increased mortality rate from heat-related illnesses and cardiovascular concerns is on the uptick as well. And you can see here 37% of heat-related deaths are believed to be attributed to human-induced climate change. So this is something that we're seeing today. Now, specifically in the Caribbean islands, just in 2022 alone, looking at what we've seen in global economic losses, over $3 billion in economic damages occurred to the Caribbean in 2022 alone. And again, we've already said about that upfront investment, but again, it's easier said than done. And what are the type of major impacts that we see? Well, first is going to be on your home. So increased hurricanes and floods destroy home, leading to displacement of residents, costly repairs, and loss of personal property. Now, many residents face prolonged recovery times, and this could be due to inadequate resources, inadequate or non-existent insurance, and infrastructure that was just not prepared for this type of storms. The other major impact is going to be on tourism. Extreme weather disrupts tourism, damaging resorts, beaches, and attractions. And flight cancellations and even public safety concerns lead to a decreased number of visitors, and this really impacts the economy. Another area is in transportation, which covers both the residents and the tourists. So things like flooded roads, transportation, and things like delayed aid or supplies and travel can really affect daily life and hinder recovery efforts. Another area that we see a major impacting is marine life. So coral reefs, which are also crucial for biodiversity, but coastal protection as well, are suffering from storm damaging rising temperatures. So marine habitats can be degraded, and this impacts things like fisheries or the tourism, which is reliable on these healthy ecosystems. Now, as I said before, we do have research today that every US dollar invested in a resilient building can save $4 in recovery costs. But why isn't that happening today? So, to bring in the perspective of the tourist industry, specifically from the Caribbean, I'm going to ask Nicola to join us. Now, Nicola is the immediate past president of the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association, and she's also with Courtleigh Hospitality Group, which is based in Jamaica. So, thank you so much for joining us, Nicola, and allow me to have you take the stage.
Standby agreements in place, which are costly to maintain the possibility that there will be an impact. So we have that as one end of things. We also have specialized construction needs. When we are building in the Caribbean, we have to build for harsh weather conditions. We are on the coast, so we have to take into consideration corrosion and other things that would impact the hotels. And that is maybe not something that necessarily other areas have to deal with when you're building and having to be built for resiliency. And that is something we have realized, that these materials are more expensive than standard construction supplies. So the cost to be resilient is high. The ongoing damage that we're facing and to be able to build back again is high. You mentioned insurance, and that is something that we are seeing going throughout the region. We are in the high risk zones, and this leads to inflated premiums, especially after a major storm. Insurance reassess their risks and tend to adjust prices upwards. There's also limited coverage options. We see that where they're paying higher premiums for the available plans. And even if you do get the plan, the deductibles and payouts are often very high. And so hoteliers sometimes can't get enough coverage for the full cost of repairs that they could face after a disaster. So that is particularly challenging. It's even more challenging for really, I would say, smaller hoteliers when you're talking mom and pops, where they may not be able to provide the necessary financial backups and of their accounting finances for it to be able to prove that they have the ability to pay their premium. So again, another challenge. We not to mention the issues of the impacts of sargassum on which is coming out of climate change, and the costs to be able to remove that seaweed off of the beaches to continue to give that pristine beach line. So overall, these are some of the major costs that we are seeing. We are also seeing that when we have disasters and we have these extended closures of periods, that the repairs and the loss of revenue. So you may get general insurance to rebuild, but you may not get business interruption insurance. So that's another thing that you're facing. So not only do you have to deal with the repairs, but you aren't able to get coverage for loss of revenue. So that is another issue. There is also the perception that our guests have when we have an impact of a storm within the region. Sometimes it's felt that the entire Caribbean is not able to operate, or even within an island. For example, you have one side of the island that's impacted, but the feeling is that the entire island has been impacted. Sometimes this is sensationalized by media. It's great things when they follow the storms and the storm trackers, but that impact and maybe the travel advisories that come out of that is again another challenge that destinations face. So you may have the south coast of the island impacted, but everywhere else is operational and up. And so it's a PR challenge to be able to communicate to the world and to your travel partners what is happening. So that's another cost that you're facing, because you have to mitigate against the negative PR that is out there. So that is a major thing. Ongoing maintenance, of course, I mentioned in terms of the humidity and the corrosion that you face being in the areas that we are. But one other thing I want to mention is, again, how does government regulation help us? We are seeing some move towards more stricter building codes and environmental regulations in the high-risk area. but these can also drive up construction and restoration and renovation costs. You do have new build hotels that are coming in, and they are able to build more resilient facilities, but we do have a lot of infrastructure that is 20, 30, 40, 50 years old. And then that is retrofitting. And how do we help them from maybe a grant funding or some sort of creative financing to be able to take those plants and retrofit them to what is needed based on what we're facing with climate change and with these major storms that are intensifying. We used to think about having a major category 5 maybe every 20, 30 years. Now, some destinations are looking at every 5 years. In some cases, you are having major storms every year. That's a big change in terms of risk, but also in terms of being resilient. And how do we plan better? And how do we ensure that we are able to move into this field or into this area where we are faced with ongoing risk from every major season? So that is another area we have to think about. The other thing I would say is staffing. That is a challenge because once we have these severe weather conditions, as you mentioned, transportation goes down, the ability to get team members in. A lot of hotels, which in particular even our properties, which I have in Jamaica, we have to sleep in our team members to ensure that we can provide services all the way through. So it's again having plans how to deal with staff transportation, support to their team members, support to their families. So again, that's a whole logistics side of things. That is an additional cost that you have to think about as well. Not just the physical plant itself, but the human side of it. And how do we ensure that our team members are safe, their families are safe, we can transport them to work, we can put them up, and we can ensure that we can continue to provide service. So there is those challenges. Post-storm is always labor shortages always exist because it's not just the tourism industry that is trying to rebuild, but the entire country in some cases. And so it's important that we continue to upskill our employees. We continue to have multi-skilled persons because it's important that we have persons that can deal with these frequency of natural disasters and be able to work in adverse conditions because we are faced with more and more adverse conditions. The good thing, though, is that the Caribbean, generally speaking, we're very resilient people. We have been through a lot of challenges with the COVID-19 pandemic. The feeling was the Caribbean, being the most tourism dependent region in the world, would be one of the last regions to rebound out of the pandemic. And we were one of the first. And I think it's the fact that we had these adverse conditions before. We were able to quickly double down, use collaboration, use the skills and the knowledge that we had from previous disasters and high-risk disasters to be able to implement some of those quickly and to cut through some of the red tape that sometimes challenges other regions who may not have had these kind of experiences. So I think on the plus side, the Caribbean has the experience, or people have a knowledge of how to deal with adverse conditions. And it's now ensuring that we can codify that into our DNA, so to speak, and really see what are some of the other tools that we can put in place to ensure that we're not caught on the back foot, but we are able to really build better and help our communities through this as well. So I don't know if we stop there, Michelle, and come back. That's my opening presentation.
No, that's great. And I think that that's a lot of what we're going to talk about in the next two sessions. And I think really we're hearing, your call as well for who's going to pay for this, right? We have a lot of the increased regulation. We know that we need to do this. So to first start on what has to be done and what are we doing today, right? I wanted to bring in Arlen from Gensler, who works on the side of resilience day to day, trying to understand how are we going to do this, right? Before we get to the finance, how are we going to do it and how are nations making these plans? So let me pass it over to you, Arlen. I'm going to move you to the stage here. Move from stage. And then if you can share your screen, I think you should be able to see it.
Can folks hear me okay?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. And can folks see my screen?
I'm sharing 1 second mine, but you should be able to share yours in a second. Let me stop. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Okay, how about now?
Yeah,
Can
that
folks see
looks
my screen?
perfect.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Michelle, thanks for inviting me to this. I really see this work as my life's work and something that I'm pretty proud of. And we have a lot of unanswered questions and a lot of opportunities as well. And so a little bit that we try to the way that we try to think of it, we try to think of it as can we create a design solution for this? So this is essentially what architects are trying to do. And in order for me to get into it, I kind of need to frame it a little bit. So where are we now? I'll talk a little bit about an initiative that I worked on with Resiliency. It's a global alliance in Puerto Rico. Then I'll talk about what we're doing to decarbonize the built environment, as well as the ESG and climate action practice that we've set up, and just some closing remarks that I like to live by. So today we have four huge, enormous global challenges. We have climate change. We have climate refugees and war-torn refugees. We have carbon emissions that's completely expanding, and then we have we're on the verge of biodiversity collapse. And these are enormous challenges that the design industry has an opportunity to sort of step up and take an active role in to help paint the picture for the future. So I'm going to take a step really far back and get people to really think about this. So we have the technology today to live anywhere on the planet, in some of the coldest environments with mechanical heating, and in some of the hottest environments with mechanical cooling. And we understand that the Earth is getting hotter. We're seeing record-breaking temperatures on an annual basis increase across the globe. We're seeing unprecedented fires in the Arctic, unprecedented fires in the Amazon, unprecedented fires across Europe, unprecedented fires in Australia and in the United States. And the way that we're seeing this is that this is only getting worse. The way that we look at water needs to change. So if you look at this map, essentially the big sphere is the sphere of the Earth, but the smallest, this sphere right here is essentially the amount of salt water that exists on the Earth, and this sphere right here is the amount of fresh water that exists on the Earth, and then this small dot is the amount of drinkable water that exists on the Earth. And so the way that we think of water also needs to change, and our perception of water needs to change. Today we have 2 billion people with too much water, and we have another 2 billion people without enough. And we have the resources to tackle a lot of these issues of water scarcity. And without water, there really is no sense of life. And the more we try to control our water with these enormous infrastructural projects, the more our water really begins to control us. So this is a satellite or kind of an aerial view of Southern California, where we're literally shipping water from Montreal to feed our crops in the southwestern portion of the United States. The Arctic is melting, and some scientists actually believe that it could lead to up to 6 meters or 25 feet of flooding over the course of the next century. When that actually happens, that's still to be determined. I've had the ability to actually visit some of these glaciers, and it was really mind blowing to stand on these glaciers and to go in some of these ice caves and realize that the cave that I went there in 2018 is really no longer there. Uh, we've had enormous storms, and so Hurricane Andrew cost the U.S. 27 billion in the 1990s. Hurricane Katrina cost the U.S. 150 billion. Hurricane Sandy 90 billion. Hurricane Harvey 125 billion. Hurricane Maria 90 billion in the Caribbean and mostly in Puerto Rico. The Texas winter storm 130 billion. And over the past 25 years, the U.S. alone has spent over $1 trillion in revitalization efforts from extreme storm surge events. So how long will we be able to live like this, the way we do now, with this continuous cost and this continuous climb? Will we need to resort to some level of human migration, like our ancestors did in the past? So those are some of the big challenges, and this is what I'm going to talk about, which is what is resilience, and why, as designers, architects, engineers, real estate professionals, are we responsible? So if you look at the practice of architecture, we have a civic duty as licensed professionals to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public. So for health, it's about securing the physical, biological, and mental health of building and landscape occupants. For safety, it's about addressing the safety of the building and the landscape for the structural compromise, as well as the physical safety of occupants. And then for welfare, it's really about understanding our social equity and our long-term survival as a human species. And the AIA, as sort of the global hub of architecture, it really stands behind this, and it stands behind that architects really have this responsibility, and we need to readily absorb and within the projects that we're designing these adverse events that are affecting our buildings. Recently, the AIA issued this document. This is a document that essentially documents the climate and hazard risks. So at the beginning of a project, if you're using the AIA contracts, this is a piece that argues that these are the climate projections, these are the risks associated with those projections in this project location, and then this is the design solutions that we're intending to propose as part of the mitigation effort. So it's really incredible to see this effort, but we're seeing enormous pushback as well. So climate shocks are making different parts of the United States even more uninsurable, and California in particular is pulling back in terms of these dangerous areas. So we can't unknow this. And one of my biggest mentors said this to me, is that now that you all know this on this webinar, you can't unknow this, right? So this is a project that I had the privilege of working on post Hurricane Maria about 5 or 6 years ago. It was through the Resiliency Alliance, which is a global alliance of many types of architecture firms and industries involved. And it was really a phenomenal effort. It was a pro bono effort, but the intent was, what can we do to help support different countries, specifically Caribbean island countries that are dealing with an extreme storm surge event like Hurricane Maria. So what we did is we planned it through this, something we called the Resilient Sea Framework. So understanding the social impact, the environmental impact, and the economic impact in terms of resilience. And the big piece of this was really about understanding the history. So this is a map that illustrated through historic records of data and GIS mapping the catastrophic events that have hit the island of Puerto Rico. And the one that's faded right here, that's the darkest line, that's Hurricane Maria, and that's the hurricane that went right through the island. So what we've done is we've used the technology that we have today, the data that we have today, to map out some of the hydrological risks of the Toa Baja region, specifically within Puerto Rico. So we chose a region within Puerto Rico to focus on, to invest in, and to work with the community to develop a resilient master planning effort for it. And so we've overlaid this with a number of things. So we've looked at the environmental ecological analysis of the site. And so, for example, 20% of Puerto Rico has, kind of like a clay-like surface, and it's susceptible to landslides and liquefaction. But 16% of Toa Baja, for example, is developed land. So we're looking at the loss of the coastline and the fragmented natural reserves that are happening over time. We've also overlapped it with the topography. So and I'm going to flip through this really quickly because I have a lot to get through, but essentially we're mapping different components. So this is the hospitals and the emergency shelters, as well as some of the special communities that are there. And some of those special communities are actually communities that are, they consist of almost, they're kind of free forming communities, which means that they weren't necessarily formed by the government themselves. So what we've done is we've started to overlap these things. You look at the electrical infrastructure, you look at the special communities, you look at the public housing, and then you take all the vulnerabilities and you take all the assets and you overlap it, and you start to see where you can get your biggest impact. And that's what allowed us to choose Toa Baja as the opportunity space within the island of Puerto Rico for this biggest impact. One, because they were hit with over 13,000 damaged properties. They've had over 14,000 flooded hours. They've had only over 400 million in terms of property damages, equaling sort of like a total of 60 million of an economic cost just from Hurricane Maria. And we said, what can we do about this? Some of the planning that we proposed was, if we work with the natural systems that are there on the island, so for example, the river corridors, and we work with the developers that are proposing certain projects close to these river corridors, and we enhance the ecology and the river systems that exist within the island itself, we can start to develop a regenerative design solution to regenerate the river corridor, but also create a sense of open space and recreation that preserves part of the island and also protects it from another storm surge event like Hurricane Maria. And so these are some of the walkable communities and some of the social infrastructure within that region. And essentially, we've developed sort of schemes that are looking at urban centers and schools, looking at social health and wellness, and looking at opportunities to basically redevelop different parts of the island, but also the critically vulnerable zones, and not to build it the same way that it was done before, but to really build it smarter and to build it with a sense of different structural integrity within the project. A better sense of energy storage. So, for example, if there's a power outage, can the buildings that are there, can they actually be regenerated after a major power outage by having their own sort of source of energy on site? Understanding the vegetation that's a part of it, and dealing with like a solar thermal heater to help get more solar energy to the projects. So essentially, this was kind of the big idea for this master plan, which was you take the vulnerabilities, you take the risks, you look at the opportunities within the landscape of the framework, and you rethink the assets that are being developed within the region. So this is still a project that's going on today. It's a very long-term project, but it was a pro bono initiative that really led to a lot of new challenges and new opportunities for different thinking within that region. So in addition to the water challenges and the climate challenges, we also have the carbon challenges, and we're seeing global carbon emissions. In terms of developing a carbon tax for gas emitters in particular across the globe. So at Gensler, we're one of the largest, most connected architecture firms in the world, and we're able to look at what's happening across the world in terms of the development and really assess the assets and the companies that we're working with in terms of the design to see what the state of the industry really is. So I'm going to take a step back and get people to think a little bit more, which is we have the capability to mine Earth resources from essentially anywhere on the planet. And we do that because it's mostly cheaper to purchase from abroad. We also do it accepting the consequences that 40% of global carbon emissions are from the built environment. And if you look at the amount of global area that's going to be developed, it's expected to double by 2060. So this is a satellite view of, I believe it's Phoenix, and and how much it's doubled over the course of 10 years. That's like building something the size of New York City every 4 years. So it's pretty astronomical in terms of how much is being developed and how much is being developed in this particular way. And so this idea of changing the shift in mindset, reducing the idea of consumption into creating opportunities to reduce emissions. Our ancestors built buildings to last for thousands of years, and we build buildings today to last for 50 years, and some of our interiors up to 15 years. So 90% of the projects that we build today will need to be demolished within the next 50 years. So this is a little bit about decarbonizing the built environment and what we're doing at Gensler to change this path. And so a little bit about Gensler, as I mentioned, we're one of the largest architecture firms in the world. We're one of the most connected. We work with some of the largest clients across the globe, and we're really a research-driven practice. So a big part of our process is through the research, understanding the carbon impact that we're doing, understanding how to work with the future trends of design. And we do essentially all types of projects. We work in 33 practice areas. We essentially do every type of project except for jails, which we're proud of. Um, but an inflection point that really happened for us was post-pandemic, and understanding that the challenges of what this means for ESG, specifically in terms of development, and whether it's a hotel or whether it's an office or whether it's a new project. We've seen an enormous investment into ESG from 2020, and the projections in terms of these investments, is predicted to be 60 trillion by 2030. So we're seeing this as a huge trend across our global portfolio, that our clients are asking for more in terms of sustainability, in terms of sustainability certification. And there's more participation in terms of this conversation that we're seeing across the globe. So we're seeing it across 64 plus countries, over close to 100,000 assets. And the strongest position that we're seeing it across the globe is mostly in Europe in terms of the advancement. Now, in order to become carbon neutral and within the design process, these are essentially the three things. You need to look at how the embodied carbon and the making of the building comes together. You need to look at the operating carbon, so how the buildings are essentially performing over time. You also need to look at the carbon offsets, so understanding the renewable energy that's associated with it, or the carbon sequestration, to understand the complete total carbon impact. And the magnitude of this challenge is astronomical. We need a complete global effort to really push for this. And the challenge is that in order to really do nothing in terms of saving carbon is to actually build nothing. But that wouldn't keep us really in business. So building less is sort of the next component. We try to advise our clients to build less. But we also advise our clients to build smarter and optimize the materials that they're selecting on their projects, and build more efficiently as well, to utilize low carbon construction materials and technology waste. So the intent is that we're not necessarily focusing on building new. It's really about adaptation and addition into existing assets, because we have a lot of existing assets that are already built. We just need to rebuild them better. So as I mentioned before, we're seeing an enormous increase and an enormous ask of building certifications across the globe, almost 150% increase in terms of our portfolio. And these are the different certifications in which we're working. And because of this, we've developed an ESG consulting practice within our architectural firm. And the focus of it is really looking at strategy services, looking at assessments and analytics, certification, verification, and post-occupancy and assessments. And we're doing this across our portfolio, from from cities, urban design, to buildings, to interior fit outs, to even product design. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that, if you're an architect or developer in the room, the time is really now. There is the business case for this, and we're seeing it across our global portfolio. We're taking on some of the toughest challenges. We're participating in some of the toughest challenges. We're continuously trying to participate in COP. We developed something called the GC3 initiative, which is really about eliminating all of our carbon emissions and our carbon emissions by 2030. We have a goal of saving, 21 million of carbons, in a million tons of metric carbon. We're in addition, we're also trying to save 11 plus million of carbon annually. So this is a snapshot of our GC3 initiative. Essentially, we're committed to carbon neutrality. We're committed to working with major cities and push this progress, especially within the places in which we have offices. We're challenging the industry by doing this, and we're trying to lead the way as the largest architecture firm in the world. And we're focused on these drivers. So really understanding the environmental, social, and government impact, really pushing the environmental impact, the health impact, social equity, financial impact, and we need to grow more in financial impact. This is an area of weakness, but we want to grow more within this. Recently, or actually a couple years ago, to be totally precise, our CEOs actually sent out a letter to all of our manufacturers that we work with, and basically said that we're demanding a more resilient carbon infectious supply chain. We're only going to specify materials that are meeting certain criteria within our pipeline. And this has really shifted a lot of things. We're seeing a form of new green specifications that are happening within the partners that we work with, because they want to work with us. We've recently just developed this thing called the Gensler Product Sustainability Standards. Essentially, what this is an online database. It's free. It's open to anybody that is within the design and real estate industry. To essentially, you can look at the types of materials that exist that you're going to specify in a building, and you can look at what its embodied carbon value is. And so the intent is that we're providing this as a resource for the industry to move it. So this is a little bit about the going back to that forecast. Essentially, we've had COVID-19, we've had a recession from that. We're seeing climate change, but one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing is biodiversity collapse, and we need a much bigger effort on regenerative design in terms of our focus and within our business. So the four global design solutions compared to the four global design challenges is that we're tracking carbon. We're really beginning to do this a lot differently. It's becoming a bigger part of our process. We're beginning design. We're trying, and we're really pushing to design buildings and even cities for disassembly. So this becomes a bigger part of the conversation. As we're designing the buildings, can they transform over time, and can we save on the embodied carbon in which we're designing? We're leveraging the AI technology to implement sustainability faster in terms of imagery generation, in terms of material passport tracking. So a material passport is essentially a passport that is looking at a material that, after you take apart a building, you can scan that building material and understand its embodied carbon impact and where it was created over time. And then finally, the regenerative design solution. So in terms of the carbon tracking, we're seeing not only are we trying to push this internally, but we're also seeing legislative support pushing for this. So if you're building a building within France or the UK or Germany or the Netherlands or different parts of Scandinavia, it's actually required to do a life cycle assessment on the project depending on the size of the project through city government. And we're just beginning to see this in the United States as well. So our industry needs to get better at this, and we need better data as an industry to inform the entire industry how to design more less carbon intensive buildings. And the sustainable finance disclosure reporting is really driving a lot of this, because the real estate assets, the clients that we work with that have these real estate assets, they don't want to be taxed on the carbon that their buildings are emitting. So they want to perform these life cycle assessments on their projects to understand the impact that they're having. So as I mentioned, design for disassembly, this is a really big part of the process, reusing materials and recycling materials to develop closed loop systems. We're also, I mentioned, we're embracing those new technologies, using blockchain technology, for example, as an opportunity to create designs for disassembly. And then regenerative design, we're finding through just the simple process of investing into more biodiversity net gain on our projects, we can actually use carbon sequestration to absorb carbon from the atmosphere. So we need to see more measurement of carbon sequestration on our projects as well. So I'm going to leave you with just some words that I like to live by. Human knowledge is always limited. We may think we know the solution today, but tomorrow it could be something entirely different. And there is no shortage of money for this work. There's more of a shortage of ideas. If we can, if a superstorm Sandy can cost, New York $90 billion and Hurricane Maria $90 billion, we can spend half of that in revitalization efforts to really build super sustainable cities and super sustainable islands within the Caribbean and across the globe. And the best way to predict the future is to create it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for that presentation. Let me just share my screen again. Let me see. Okay. It should be all set. So yeah, and I mean, a lot of reactions, of course, to everything that you said, right? We have the solutions. We have what's here. We know how to get there, but how does the knowledge get to the right people? How does the developer who's on site that Andrei and I, or even Nicola is working with in an emerging market, that doesn't have the business case and doesn't really fully understand something like biodiversity or how this can benefit them. So this is really where IFC comes in as a demonstrator and being able to put some investment in these types of innovative projects. So please let me pass it over to you, Andrei. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll put you on the stage. And if you can share your screen, it would be great just to hear your insights on all of this, really as the lead for tourism.
Sure, Michelle. Thank you so much. I'm Andrei Tomilin. I'm the global sector leader for tourism at IFC. As such, I will be talking about IFC's global tourism proposition, but I would like to emphasize that it is fully relevant for island development states. IFC has been investing in tourism, in hotels, particularly since 1967. During that time, it supported many times the development of leisure industry in the Caribbean islands. IFC was the first to finance modern extended stay format in Jamaica, Trinidad and Tobago, Barbados. IFC made 7 investments in leisure tourism in the Maldives. Our recent investments included an investment in COVID recovery project in Cabo Verde and also business infrastructure hotel project in Timor-Leste. With this, let me share my screen and a session on IFC's engagement in tourism. First, why as a developmental finance institution we're excited about tourism. Tourism, we see it as a major contributor to the global GDP that generates millions of jobs globally. Tourism is related to climate problems and climate solutions, and there is high potential for climate solutions in tourism. Finally, tourism is a very robust driver of economic growth and economic impact in emerging markets globally, especially in island developing states. In terms of the economy, tourism globally accounts for about 10% of the global GDPs, and in many extents, tourism is an export industry. Again, this is what counts a lot for island developing states, because tourism is an export that can be developed without reliance on the extraction of natural resources. It boosts international visitor spending, bringing additional money to the economies, including economies of developing island countries. In these countries, it accounts sometimes for a very large portion of the GDP, up to 15%. Globally, it brought 62 billion in foreign direct investment, and 80% of suppliers to tourism businesses are small and medium-sized enterprises. In this slide on the right-hand side, you can see the impacts of IFC's investments in hotels. By investing just in one hotel in Ghana, IFC added $24 million to the country's GDP. And while developing another hotel project in Mexico, we brought benefits to a supply chain of more than 1,500 small and medium enterprise who supply to this hotel. Another major developmental benefit of investing in tourism and hotels is that this industry generates jobs. 330 million jobs internationally, to be precise, which is 1 in every 11 jobs and 1 in every 4 new jobs. These are jobs to a great extent for the young people and for women. What is very important, tourism creates jobs that are high wage, high quality jobs. They have benefits, and they result in careers rather than in simple employment. For example, in the Maldives, an island developing nation, our hotel investment generated 1,500 jobs in general, including 600 direct jobs, 1,000 indirect and induced jobs. In India, IFC invested in innovative formats that, for example, bring about women jobs, including the first all-women hotel. And again, as I mentioned before, tourism accounts for about 8% of global carbon emissions. Hotels are buildings, and the building industry accounts for 40% of energy-related emissions globally. That's why we, as a development and financial institutions, view tourism as an industry where environmental and green building solutions can be effectively used and scaled up. Tourism grows where we want to deliver impact in terms of the GDP contribution over the next 10, 11 years. The contribution of tourism to GDP is going to increase by a factor of 1.5. Especially, I invite you to look at what changes in the GDP of developing island nations. Tourism is going to bring an increase, a twofold increase for Cabo Verde, an increase, almost 2 times increase for the Maldives, the same for St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Again, tourism is an industry that grows especially fast where it is most relevant for the participants of this webinar. The same with jobs. Jobs in the emerging markets, tourism jobs in the emerging markets are going to show especially high growth, significantly exceeding that in the developed world. That is why, at IFC, we very much like the tourism industry, and I'm going to talk specifically about hotels. That's what my business practice at IFC does. Essentially, hotels is the essential building block of tourism. Very few people will be traveling if there is no hotel for them to stay on the other end of their travel at their destination. Again, hotels are instrumental in achieving client goals. They are very important employers, especially for the youth and the women, and they're great contributors to GDP on many levels. As such, tourism accommodation hotels, they contribute towards the fulfillment of the Sustainable Development Goals, specifically the goal of living in a world with no poverty, living in a world with decent work and economic growth, responsible consumption and production, climate action, life below water, and life on land are the Sustainable Development Goals that hotels and investments in hotels help achieve. So how does IFC support hotels? IFC is part of the World Bank Group. Within the World Bank Group, there are several institutions. The International Bank for Reconstruction of Development and Development helps countries to form their tourism strategy, helps with investments in infrastructure. The International Development Association provides granted money and subsidized funding for critical projects. MIGA guarantees investments of equity investors against political and currency transferability risks. On the IFC side, we are connected in many ways with tourism. Our infrastructure department invests in road and transportation. Our financial services department finance banks that are active in the tourism sector. My business practice invests in hotels, which, as I mentioned before, is the critical block for and really the foundation for developing the tourism industry. In the tourism industry, we work with three counterparts. We work with private sector investors. These are people and companies who put money in the development of hotels, who own the hotels. These are the recipients of our financing. These are our clients. We also work with other banks and financial institutions active in the industry. We mobilize capital for them, and together with capital from IFC, we are prepared to provide long-term loan solutions for our clients, for private sector investors. We also work with hotel management companies. You see the very familiar names such as Radisson, Accor, Marriott. Typically, these companies do not own or develop hotels. They provide management services for private investors under long-term management agreements. We work with them, but we do not provide financial solutions as a rule to hotel management companies. Again, our focus are private sector investments, the individuals and the companies who invest and own hotels in developing countries, including in island developing states. Our propositions are fourfold. We provide to our clients long-term loans to develop hotels, to acquire hotels, to refurbish hotels, including sustainability-linked loans, where upon the achievement of various targets linked to resource efficiency, to environmental protection, to social goals, the conditions of such loans could become better for our clients. And we, in each case, tailor our financial solutions to address the particular needs of our clients. Say such tailoring can take form of a very long-term loan over, say, 10, 12 years. It can take the form of a repayment profile that takes into account the future performance of the hotel. We provide expertise. I said that we invested in hotels since 1967, including in island developing countries. During this time, we invested in over 350 hotels in over 98 countries. So we do have in-house expertise in hotels. We know how they built, we know how they operated, we know how to finance them so that they be successful. We provide advisory, again, very much in line with what the previous speakers were talking about. We help hotel owners and operators achieve a high resource efficiency. There is a resource efficiency certification that was launched by IFC and is increasingly popular now globally. It's called EDGE. We also run a decarbonization consultancy program that is called GRIP. The tool we promote actively is the Building Resilience Index, which measures the resilience of buildings, including hotels, to natural impacts, which are very well basically relevant to development island states, BRI. I'm going to talk about these tools a little bit later. We also provide advisory in terms of labor. Hotels, as I said, are very labor-intensive businesses, and we make sure that labor is treated right there. Labor has the rights it should have, and that management and labor works harmoniously. This includes the diversity of labor force, including the gender aspect. And since hotels serve food, we find that it's very important for us to be able to develop food safety advisory to our clients. Currently, we're working on an innovative project. We want to define what responsible tourism is, how to measure the company's journey towards becoming a responsible player in the tourism industry, and how to deliver knowledge and financing to companies who want to be responsible players in the sector better. So our investment focus based on this are large corporate loans to companies that own main assets. In cases that are especially developmental, we work with high-worth individuals, family offices that invest in single asset hotels. We provide the advisory I've just talked about. And in terms of the engagement themes, IFC tries to be there for our clients whenever there is a project with a strong development impact, with a focus on the tougher markets, including island development states. We try to address situations in the first place where there is a clear supply-demand gap, where there are no hotels or no hotels of the right categories in the market. We explore new markets. We finance apart hotels, long-stay hotels, basically whatever the country or particular market needs, and if there is an innovative solution for the hotel, for the tourism industry there, we are willing to finance it. We work together with our colleagues from other parts of the World Bank Group and other financial institutions, making the investments as friendly as possible to our clients. We support business hotels as well as resort developments, especially, well, both in terms of the new constructions and upgrades, refurbishments. We encourage green initiatives and we provide crisis response as well. So the case studies globally of our investments is, well, I mean, we helped Casada, a private equity fund specialized in acquisition and refurbishment of hotels in Africa, to build a portfolio of hotels throughout the continent during the time when COVID was rampant. We financed Casada, and as a result, they are now one of the largest owners of hotels on the African continent. In doing that, in providing financing for Casada, we also introduced them to the EDGE energy efficiency tool, and now all the hotel refurbishments that are performed by Casada, we're making sure that they're achieving at least 20% energy efficiency, resource material efficiency targets. We also provide to Casada advice in the labor relationship field, making sure that, again, I mean, the management works harmoniously with the labor at their hotels. Shangri-La is a big chain in Asia. We worked with them repeatedly in many countries, including in island nations. One of the focuses of our investments in Casada is that our financing comes with the focus on with Shangri-La, is that the focus of our investment with Shangri-La is their work with suppliers, many of them of whom are small and medium-sized enterprises. Well, Adris Hotels in Croatia, we did the first green and blue loan in Croatia. We supported a major hotel player there who is committed to environmental protection targets as well as to marine protection targets. As they achieve these targets, the conditions of our loans become more friendly to the client. They become better. Generally, in terms of achieving energy efficiency and social targets and environmental protection targets, we think that the sustainability-linked loans and sustainability-linked bonds is a very effective instrument, and we use it fairly widely around the world. This slide shows the examples of such investments available from IFC. In terms of Edge, basically, and other tools that we use in addition to financing, I would like to talk about them in a little bit more of detail. Edge is a green building certification program that provides measurable way for the developers of hotels as well as for the owners of hotels to optimize for the developers their design, for the owners of the hotel how to make their refurbishments more optimal. To achieve various targets, and the targets are tiered according to levels. Those developers and owners who achieve 20% reductions in this consumption of energy, water, and energy embodied materials, that they are certified level 1 Edge. Also, there are level 2 and level 3 certifications for the achievement of 40% efficiencies and for elimination carbon through offsets. Again, this certification is a product that was developed by IFC in-house that is becoming very popular around the world. At the end of the day, it helps developers save from 1 to 4% of the construction cost. And while the payback for doing an Edge certified development or refurbishment is generally from 3 to 5 years. Again, we have expertise on how to achieve these efficiencies, and we have put in place independent certification practices that helps the world recognize these achievements by our clients. Again, this product is very relevant to hotels. We've done a number of hotel projects around the globe that are now Edge certified. One of the products that we have been increasingly promoting and launching with 10 engagements to date is Green Real Estate Investment Portfolios. This is an advisory project for owners of real estate portfolios, including hotels, where we pair our clients or prospective clients, recipients of our financing, with consultants in-house and external that set our clients onto a journey to set and to achieve decarbonization targets. Again, one of our clients, Marmara Group, is on the journey to decarbonize 14 of its properties, and IFC role alongside with providing financing to the group is set to accompany to a journey of decarbonization. We provide labor advisory. Again, we help the companies to figure out the pain points, the conflict points between management and labor, and make sure that labor relationships are fixed. They are put on sustainable foundation, and that's a labor-intensive industry like hotels. Treats its employees fairly and with dignity. Again, our African project Casada has set on a journey with us to make sure that their labor relationships in their hotels are harmonious and that labor is treated correctly and with dignity. We provide a food security advisory, including to our hotel clients. Wherever food is served, our expertise could be used to make sure that food losses are prevented, that greenhouse emissions related to the food losses be reduced, and the food supplies be used most efficiently in our hotel assets. One of the recipients of the clients of this service is Azalai Hotels. We basically came in with advisory projects, identified a whole of 36 opportunities to make the back end of hotels owned by the hotel chain Azalai more efficient, and to treat its food and food waste in the right environmentally friendly way. One of the tools that we have in our toolkit for our clients, especially in the island nations, is the Business Resilience Index. Again, we have a tool and a toolkit that can assess a property and rate it how much ready it is to meet various natural disasters, including wind, water, fire, geoseismic activity, and how to manage the related risk. Again, this is a tool that we have in our internal toolkit, and alongside with the capital and other advisory tools that I mentioned, is available to our hotel clients. Again, something that we are looking forward to developing is the concept of responsible tourism. We want to create a very well-defined notion of while saying what responsible tourism is, and to measure where our client or counterpart in the hotel industry is on their journey towards being called a responsible tourism sector player. Again, this is a framework that is currently in the stage of development, but the goal is to develop standards that sets responsible tourism goals and measures each hotel sector, tourism sector player, where it is on its journey towards its goal to be a responsible tourism company. We will be addressing very shortly to all current parts in the industry and broadly to flesh out this concept and to make it operational for our clients and for broader tourism community. Thank you so much. This is pretty much summarize IFC's value proposition in the field of tourism investment, hotel investment, and making them more resilient, more sustainable globally, including in the island nations.
Thank you so much, Andrei. So let me just drop to the end of our presentation. Let me just put on my screen again, and kind of summarize everything that we've gone through today, right? So let me see, it should be fine. Okay, perfect. It's come up now. Okay, we have the problem statement, right? We have the issue that there is not enough money to finance this, right? But we do have the knowledge out there. The knowledge exists. We have the designers that can put this together, but we have the people who don't have access to that capital. But we do have that solution, right? In terms of IFC, in terms of the development banks, and even more increasingly, we're having this from the commercial banks as well. Some of the ones listed there, I saw Standard Chartered Bank. They're also doing things on transition finance and certification. So just to add a bit more on EDGE or LEAD or BRI, again, I'm from the advisory, the buildings expertise group, and it's meant to be an easier, less barrier to entry for this tool, meaning that when somebody is able to use it, it costs a little bit less to go through the certification. It's focusing only on 3 key elements, which are going to be 20% energy, 20% water efficiency, and 20% embodied carbon in materials. This is different, of course, than the LEED or the BREEAMs that focus on a lot more things. So please do try this out. This is a tool everybody can access today. It's at edgebuildings.com. I also want to point you towards the fact that we have a element in here about utility cost reduction. I think one of the barriers that we see, and again, as an architect working at a development bank, you know, we had the answers, we know how to do things, but how do you do it in the most cost effective, almost no incremental cost way? And Edge will really offer you a good tool to see what the extra costs are, what is the payback period, and to make those smart choices first when it comes to passive design features that can keep things low. We can also do any kind of building. We talked about issues with tourism, but if you have warehouses or hospitality, we know, of course, I know Nicola had said, even some of the smaller hoteliers, they don't have the financial backup. You know, what's happening with their supply chain? Who can they go to? And I think this is a big area that we can work in strengthening all of those things. Andrei also mentioned Building Resilience Index. It is available for everyone to use now. You can go in and do a self-assessment of your buildings. For those who don't know what this is, Building Resilience Index, as Andrei had introduced, is at resilienceindex.org. It helps you identify and manage risk, but I think one thing that's also the difference, right? Like there may be a loss of revenue happening, like Nicola had said, because the perception that everything has been destroyed, right? Or everything is not safe. Here you can actually show within your rating a superior level of certification. So are you A+? So not only are we mitigating risk, but we're also preparing and saying we're excellent in the way we're approaching risk. And this also ties back to all of the ESG reporting in terms of investor risk mitigation and other things that you're able to do. Also, Andrei mentioned the food loss calculator, GHG and cost calculator that we have. And Blue Loan Taxonomy. The Blue Loan Taxonomy is out, and that's going to be on the ICMA website. We also are going to be seeing a resilience taxonomy coming out this year from ICMA, which is International Capital Markets Association. This is going to start to define what is qualifying for this finance, right? And we also have the biodiversity taxonomy. I think there's a really important part here where we need the financial models to align and the financial guidelines to align with what the designers are doing, right? In terms of biodiversity, if you're creating a biodiverse project, how do we ensure that that biodiversity is eligible for the finance products that are out there? So I think really in terms of closing up the session, our call to action would be just really be that that person who brings together all the different elements. And I'll let each of the people who joined today say their kind of final thoughts on what the call to the finance industry would be and what really your region needs. So Nicola, I'll start with you. What would be your final thoughts? You know, you've seen the presentations today. What can we do to help the Caribbean Association, or what is the best thing that we can do as IFC to help drive this issue forward?
Well, I think first and foremost, and that's the process you're starting now, it's education, allowing the various players within the industry to understand the tools that are available, the support that is available, and how to easily access that. It may be through looking at some projects as clustering, because, you know, for some of the smaller islands, they may not be able to take things on by themselves or individual hotel members. So I think that's one of the first aspects of it. Then looking at driving that knowledge a little bit further in terms of the governments, in terms of policy setting, and being able to work with the various players to ensure that if we are going to build more sustainable and build smart, that the tools that we need to bring in to be able to do those developments are not faced with high tariffs and taxes. So that's on the other side, policy. So I think those two things is a broader communication strategy, and then also looking at government policy to drive sustainability and ensuring that we can de-risk the Caribbean tourism product even more so.
That's great. Thank you. And I hope you heard about our recent event in Jamaica where we were doing the green bond and the other training. So I'm hoping that we're trying to do this more. So Arlen, I'm going to move you to the stage for this. What would be your final call? I mean, you've heard how we present finance in terms of how does designer help someone navigate towards these types of things?
I have to agree with Nicola's first comment, which is education is really the key to the access. The research and the knowledge is out there, and it's just about applying it. It's about putting the right people in the right room and almost designing the conversation. And that's what I think that's so brilliant about IFC is it is kind of designing the conversation about sustainable finance. But for us, it's about designing the conversation, getting the right people in the room, and really developing long-term systems thinking solutions. The investments that we make today could have a rippling effect on the neighborhoods and the districts and even the cities and the countries in which we work. Apply best practices, look for low embodied carbon materials, understand the climate projections in your project location, understand the vulnerabilities, and then look at how the design solution can address that. So I think that it's really about that access, and it's also about just reaching out if you don't know.
Okay, great. And then Andre, I'm going to put it to you, and this is going to be, I want you to simplify. How would someone approach IFC if they have a project that they're interested in, right? I think that even demystifying that part is interesting because we had a couple questions on this, but also your reflections of the event. I'm putting you on the stage, Andre.
Apologies, I had issues with my mic. Could you please repeat the question?
So I was just asking, what would be your final statement? Say we've had a few questions. How would people even approach IFC about this? And any final notes before we close?
No, well, basically the final notes is that, hotels, and tourism in general is a major contributor to economies in island nations. Again, this is a resource that can be created and can be cultivated in a responsible, sustainable fashion. Again, if the right resources and the right approaches are used, it could be one of the main contributors to the economic growth around these nations.
Okay.